How you doing, guys? Eric from rulethewasteland.com. I noticed my little batteries might be getting a little low on my cactus. He's getting kind of tepid. Uh, but yeah, so here we're back. Lots going on in the world. Interesting stuff. And I just wanted to remind you, get on the Patreon because in the first live stream of, what are we now, April, May, June, I'll be giving away this Fox Edge. This is model number FE009. Fantastic knife. And like I've said before, I really don't want to give this one away, and I wouldn't if I didn't already have way too many knives. And it's got a sweet sheath that can attach to all sorts of different stuff. Never been used, just manhandled by me for the sake of showing it off. Some kind of warranty in there. And of course, we'll also be giving away 25 free entries into the next one. And this very lightweight paperweight, high density plastic. So jump on, and always, of course, remember that if you want to guarantee that you will survive any kind of apocalypse, you need to go on Amazon and get the Rule the Wasteland Survival Fishing Kit. Pictured here is the micro version, fits neatly in the palm of your hand. We also have the deluxe version that come with a full apocalypse guarantee. If you buy Rule the Wasteland Survival Fishing Kit and you die in any sort of shit the fan scenario, you get a refund. But what do you have to lose? Other than your life in an apocalypse. What's up? Thank you for letting me know that everything is working. My record has been less than stellar at making these Sunday evening appointments last couple of weeks, but had just various things going on. Couldn't do it. So I'm glad to be here talking with you guys. We have a few things to go over, but be thinking about any of the stuff that you want to talk about too, because mostly I try to focus on stuff obviously from a preparedness standpoint. A lot of that in my mind right now, the important stuff is economy, economics, in like World War III, global affairs, to a lesser extent politics as it interconnects with all of that. Impossible to avoid, unfortunately. What's up, Utah Mike and Mr. Landfill? Thanks for stopping in. So the main few things, like I said, I had predicted at the beginning of the year that I thought we would see extreme volatility in the markets with a downward trend, and we did see that. But within the last few weeks, last month or so, the S&P is basically completely recovered. I don't think that that's going to last. It may get a little higher before it goes down again, but it is surprising to me that it's recovered as much as it has. We've seen a lot of, like I said, a lot of volatility. So anyone who hung out avoided that dip, as well as people who sold beforehand. They basically recovered everything. So either selling or doing nothing were both effective strategies. What you don't want to do is sell the lows, buy the highs, which is so many people do just because they're basing their decisions on FOMO and fear, uncertainty, and doubt and whatnot. But we were seeing a lot of trouble in the bond markets, or not necessarily trouble so far, but the yields are beginning to climb. It doesn't seem like they're able to keep them suppressed. And there's always been the situation where you have to choose between like the markets or the currency, basically. And who knows what they're going to eventually do, but they're having trouble keeping the bond yield suppressed, if they're even specifically trying to. They'll never know for sure. But the other things that we have, well, we have a few things coming up on the horizon, hence the name of this live stream, that could cause additional problems, especially with higher yields in treasuries. And the biggest one is that we still have to roll over like I think it's 9 trillion wrote down, $9 trillion in debt has to roll over at some point this year. And the way to do that is to borrow more. That's the way they always do it, to roll it over. So you have to, these T-bills expire and they have to make new ones because they can't just pay it all off. So they have to, when these come to maturity, they have to get new debt to pay for that because we don't have the money, because the United States is completely insolvent. And they will just sell new debt, of course, like they always have. That's been the way they've been doing it for decades and even farther. But with the bond yields higher, they have the new money that they have to borrow is going to be at a lot higher interest rate, potentially 5% or more. I think it's like 4.5 right now for a lot of these 10-year bonds. and they have to roll over like $9 trillion worth at a now much higher interest rate, and maybe even more. I think most of that is. I'm not sure when exactly that rolls over. I'll have to try and figure that out. I'm sure it's not all at once, just throughout the year. But yeah, rolling it over, adding to debt at just a higher interest rate is going to increase the yearly burden that you have to pay for interest. So basically means the government has to spend more money, even more money than they're already spending, and it's already deficit spending. So we're already spending money we don't have as a country. We're going to be spending even more and getting absolutely nothing for it. That increase in money that you'll spend between this 9 trillion that's sitting there right now and the 9 trillion that they'll have to borrow to pay that off, we're going to be paying even more and get zero additional marginal benefit from increasing our national debt, other than kicking the can down the road. And so that's bad, obviously. Continues to just put another nail in the coffin for the current financial system, the currency, debt markets. But unfortunately, it's impossible to tell exactly how long this charade can last because it's such a super complex system. Other countries get a say in this as well as the US, depending on what they decide to do, especially when you consider, the fact that we're basically at war, if not in name, certainly in practice, and could be potentially at war soon with even more of the world, China, Iran, whatever. So it's going to get weird. And then also, for those of you who don't know, the debt ceiling is currently needs to be raised or is like frozen, I guess. And the deadline for raising that is July, where they either have to raise the debt ceiling again or default. Of course, they're not going to default. They're going to raise it again. But then when that happens, obviously that's just saying, let's borrow more. And I think basically they're going to have to borrow like or create $1 trillion roughly at around that time just for money that they're spending in the meantime to refill the coffers because they haven't been able to raise the debt limit. So definitely going to get weird. So 9 trillion rollover, debt ceiling going to get raised again. And then I think it was Donald Trump Jr. or somebody reminded me that there's what they're calling the Rio Reset coming, another big BRICS summit happening in Brazil in later this year. Not sure exactly when that is. It might also be around July. But we've seen in the past that not a whole lot has come of these BRICS summits, other than just inching away from the current. Yeah, exactly. What's up, HTP? Everything is certainly fine. No reason not to put all your money in promises from a group that has just done nothing but break promises. You don't need gold and silver. You don't need guns. You don't need food. Just get your boosters. Let's get your boosters. That's all you need. Another booster shot. Speaking of turbo cancers, I'm sure you guys have heard that Biden was diagnosed with cancer, and this was not new. People acting like it's like they just decide like it's either fake or they didn't know about it. Like he's on video on stage saying, in his demented state, being like, and this was like 2 years ago, and he's like, and that's why I and so many others have cancer, and everyone's like, what? And they were like, he didn't have cancer, he just doesn't know how to talk. And that was before people admitted he was demented. And also, like people pointed out, prostate cancer is one of the easiest ones to catch if you're doing yearly blood work or more. You certainly would catch that, and they certainly do that for the president. You get your PSAs, or I think it's prostate specific antigens or whatever, would definitely pop for something abnormal that would cause him to check out. He said on video that he has cancer, and they just made an excuse for it. So obviously, and now it's metastasized. They're probably just announcing it because obviously he doesn't have long left, and it's easy to take people's minds away from the auto pen stuff and the fact that they had to admit that he was completely unfit for service. And that's why I really at this point, like for the people who, and I have some friends and people I know that are intelligent people that just poo-pooed the fact that, like, when I was saying Biden had dementia for months leading up to when it was like publicly acceptable to admit it. And if you couldn't admit to yourself that Biden was, and publicly especially, that Biden had severe mental difficulties and decline, even absent any sort of specific diagnoses, then your ability to just process information and come to a logical conclusion free from basically peer pressure doesn't exist, or it's incredibly tainted. And that obviously is visible in a lot of people because that's exactly what happened. They may even had recognized kind of at some part in their brain that that's correct, but then their brain thinks, not is this true? It's what does the rest of my group or tribe or world or society think about me saying this? You know what I mean? And that's more important to them. And they realize that just being called a conspiracy theorist or a hater or a right winger or whatever that you get called for saying that this obviously demented person is demented, that's more important to them than the truth. So they are nothing that anyone who couldn't admit that Biden had serious mental decline at the very least. Nothing that they say about anything else is meaningful to me at this point because, at least in terms of evaluating, public affairs or any sort of controversial information. Yeah, exactly. It's female and weaker person because your first thought is not what is the truth here and what do I need to do about it. It's what is the impact on me if I say these things. And then if it's to be outgrouped or ostracized, then you say, well, that can't be the thing that needs to be said. The truth about it is irrelevant. It's what do I need to say, I think, or say out loud in this scenario to get my desired outcome, which is just not being outgrouped, not being told I'm crazy, not being told I'm a conspiracy theorist. And you saw that all throughout COVID as well. It's just people would rather be wrong with the group and even suffer all the consequences of that, not be ostracized, than be correct but viewed as like a crazy person. And you even see that with the stuff that that's now the Overton window has shifted about COVID and Biden. It's an even more kind of insidious and nefarious part of that whole group thing is that even the stuff that they've admitted that we were right about, it doesn't matter because we got there the wrong way. You're still wrong, or ignoring the experts and the orthodoxy and the ways of thinking that they do. You're not allowed, it doesn't matter that you were right if you got there the wrong way. You're still a bad person or you're still, in the naughty group. And that's just pathetic. And all the people who fell for it are basically not intelligent enough to see what's happening right in front of them, or and this is the truth in most cases, they're too affected by that group thinking. And so if you didn't think it was very obvious that Biden was severely mentally declined, or you had no worries about and trusted all the science related to COVID, then you need to do some serious reevaluation about how you approach information that's fed to you, logical, deductive reasoning, all those sort of things in terms of how you approach the future as well. Question, says Damien. Do you still believe that a nuke attack is unlikely? I hope so. I still want a bunker. On the US, yeah, I think a nuke attack is very unlikely. A nuke attack somewhere in the world at some point, a nuke going off over the next few years is probably pretty high. Unfortunately, I think someone, just like Canadian Prep and others have been saying, I think that there's a lot of people who have them. All those people are mad at each other. Someone's going to set one off at some point when they get desperate, and it'll just be a small tactical nuke. I don't think that it'll escalate into full-blown worldwide nuclear war right away, at least. I think it's definitely possible, depending on how it's used and where and under what circumstances, for a nuke to just be set off or even used, offensively and not just instant nuclear war everywhere, because that would still be suicide. But I do think it's very unlikely that someone just launches a nuke at the US. I mean, if we're going to have that level of attack, it would much more likely to be some sort of insane cyber attack and maybe an EMP type nuke or whatever. But even still, you'd have to think about what the progression is here. For someone like, there's not that many people that can do that. China, Russia, maybe Iran, maybe North Korea, maybe like India, Pakistan, or whatever. But there's, a handful of countries that wouldn't necessarily benefit from just crippling the United States right off the bat, because there would certainly be some sort of retaliatory attack. They wouldn't be able to get everything. They would still have nuclear subs out there and military bases all over the rest of the world and everything else. So it'd have to be a pretty extreme scenario for them to try to do that. They would have to be on the verge of basically a suicide bombing almost, or that they felt they were already dead. So we're certainly at a high risk of all sorts of various terror attacks, false flags, and everything. But I do think specifically a nuclear detonation on the U.S. soil is very unlikely at this point. That's my guess. Lucius says, "Don't go grouping all of us females into category. We're not the same." Yeah, but that's Right. Yeah, as you said, there are exceptions to every rule. The exception does not define the rule. Plenty of men fear breaking from the norm as well. Yeah, you don't want to fall into that midwit trap of being like, well, not all men or not all women, because it doesn't matter. If you said like, if that's true of any statement you can make, no matter how true it is, and when it's generally true, especially when it's like 70 to 90% true, there's just no point in pointing out the um exceptions. If I say, I could say that how bovines are quadrupeds. And if you're like, well, not all, some are born with 3 legs and some are born with 7 legs, and be like, yo, yes, okay. Or to say that men are taller than women, be like, on average, right? That's true. It doesn't matter that there's 6'7" women out there and some 4 foot men out there. It doesn't matter. It's a general statement at a population level. Pointing out exceptions isn't really helpful. What else we got? Yes, and as he points out, female thinking is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a way of thinking. And if you have none of that, no concern for your group, your tribe, any fear of being outgrouped or ostracized, you become maniacal, and you need some kind of anchor usually, because not everyone's going to be right about everything. You need to at least realize when everyone disagrees with you. And then you have some sort of social pressure is usually a good thing, because it's not bad to realize that everyone else thinks you're crazy, but you also have to have the constitution, the depth of faith, as they say, to realize when you have to go against the crowd, even though they're all against you. So it's actually, the problem here is more along the lines of that there is no specific, or that the whole idea of like tribe or your own people or your own group is very fractured in the US. So you can always get that no matter what idea you have, you're always going to get that kind of stimulus of, if you do or think this, you're going to be outgrouped by some group that you're at least somewhat a part of. People have their physical family, their city, maybe their larger ethnic group, or their religion, or their career field, and their actual job, the company that they're at, and all these different kind of tribes that they're in, online, the political party, whatever. And it's not very cohesive. So no matter what kind of stance or opinion you espouse publicly, is probably going to get you in hot water and or get you ostracized somewhat in one of these groups that you don't want to be ostracized in. And that's just a kind of a negative element of kind of modern society. And it's why diversity is not our strength. It causes that kind of conflict, even when you're not specifically talking about race. It's just any sort of everyone needs a kind of a tribe or a people or something that they care about, you can relate to, and feel protected by and protect, vice versa. You need a nation. And there's so many different nations in the US. Lucy says, the topic of interest, going lone wolf versus investing in real local community. In my case, I'm doubling up on investing local, already investing a lot, leading a lot of local action. Yeah, that's awesome. And more, I think you see this with a lot of people who get heavily into preparedness and get to a certain state of extreme preparedness by normie standards. You realize that, like, if things really get bad, like, it doesn't matter what you do individually. At a certain point, you have to have some kind of group, tribe, or some people that you can rely on. I think if it gets really bad. Now, that's not to say that preparedness doesn't matter, because that's completely not the case. And most SHTF scenarios will be on the minor scale or the minor side of things. But there's just a certain point at which you have to have, and that's like an area that I don't really have figured out yet, because it's very hard to get people that agree with, believe in the same things as you, are trustworthy, and are in the same location as you, and have the building desire to do the same things. But you see some of these people talk about the way they think things are going to go with a complete shutdown of society, and I'm like, man, if you don't have like a actual compound with like dozens, if not hundreds of people, you're not going to survive this scenario that you're describing. You can't just have like a homestead and survive a complete collapse of Western civilization. Now, like I've said many times, personally, I don't think that's going to happen. So I hope it's not going to happen, because I would be in a pretty bad spot just like everyone else. I'm expecting more along the lines of what we've seen throughout history of location-specific disruptions, inconsistent resources and access to them, like the grid, stuff like that, maybe going down intermittently, things getting really expensive and harder to find, supply chain disruptions, economic disruptions, civil unrest, but not complete, grid down Mad Max scenario, hopefully. Obviously, it can happen, but it doesn't happen very often throughout history, luckily. CLM says, do both, may need to be lean and quick in some, but will also need a tribe. Yeah, I mean, just because you don't have to give up being independent. I mean, that's still a huge element of that is just having a bunch of other independent people that are able to overlap their skills and resources in certain scenarios. But that doesn't mean if you're like wildfire sweeping into your neighborhood that you don't just grab your shit and go. You know what I mean? Because there's, like I said, there's no way to know exactly what we're going to be facing, but we can have some idea of what we'll need. And it's certainly the more people you have to rely on, protect each other, whatever, the more likely you are to at least spread out the burden of whatever it is, whether that's resources, defense, whatever, communications, and everything else. But it's the hardest one to do. Definitely the hardest one to do, for sure. But I think for most of us, like I said, the main thing that we're going to be facing over the next few years is more economic and resource in general, not a complete meltdown of society, hopefully. Because well, on one hand, I think it's more guaranteed that we're going to have issues, but they shouldn't hopefully be quite that serious. But also keep in mind that any preparations you do are going to better prepare you for any scenario. So even if you don't have a massive homestead with 50 people helping you out, you have a little mini homestead, you're still going to be better suited to survive anything than the people who have done nothing. And you might be able to gather some crew at that point, having their or making sure they have your best interest at heart. Is going to be harder if you wait till after the fact when people are already desperate than people you know and trust and everything ahead of time. And I mentioned before too that I think that's a lot of important thing too is trying to find and make sure you have connections with people who you trust and care about, and then figure out later how to make them into good preppers, then vice versa, than trying to find people who are already squared away with prepping and everything, and then try to make sure that they're people who are trustworthy and likable and get along with and things like that. Because that's actually a lot more difficult and a lot more rare. And it's a lot easier to set up extra resources and then have the people come and join you and be able to help out with stuff than it is to the opposite. Try to find people who are willing and able to help out, and then make sure they have or only starting with people who have resources rather, and then finding out of that group the ones who are local and have the same values and interests and everything as you, and actually get along too. People overlook that a lot too. Like if these would have to be people you actually just like being around too, or you're going to drive yourself crazy if you're in some sort of major scenario with a bunch of people who, while they may be of good character, if you just don't actually get along with them or like them, that would be rough. You don't want to stay in a bunker or whatever for weeks with someone that you just don't actually like. What else we got going on? Those are the few things the debt rollover coming up. July, I think debt ceiling. We got another BRICS summit coming up. But yeah, the big one, I think, and the one that I'm really watching is, of course, the bond markets. And that's why even with the stocks coming back out, I'm still staying on the sidelines for now. Although it might not be a bad idea. I think some gold and silver stocks have been doing well. But I'm so heavily weighted in gold and silver anyway that it doesn't really matter. Might as well just sit on the side. I'm still expecting there to be, or maybe not necessarily expecting, but I still think there's a high probability of this being kind of like not necessarily a dead cat bounce, but a trap, bear trap kind of thing. CLM says, find out where the Mormons are in your area. They're natural preppers and good people. It depends. I mean, they are going to be pretty insular already, and you're not just going to be able to show up and be like, hey, let me join your little group. Chris says groups don't last. It depends. Some groups don't last. Some groups do. That's why it's so important to make sure that there are people that have the qualities that you need and want. But yeah, it's tough to put it together for sure. Futures are showing down tomorrow. Yeah, that's what I've heard, but we've seen a lot of that where like they would go down a little bit and then kind of pop back right when who knows how much dark money the Fed is creating to pump into this stuff every day, direct purchases and stuff like that. So Dow futures are only down like 0.5% or something. S&P is down less than 1%. So down, but not looking weird. And this is on the tail. This is something I haven't mentioned yet. Is this is on the tails of the U.S. debt being downgraded, which is obvious. I think this, as far as Chops says, the Saudis bought a bunch of bonds. Question. I think they pledged to. I don't know if they have yet. And like I said, there's a ton of bonds that need to be purchased. So I don't know if them. I don't. Yeah, like I said, I'd have to research that to see if they've actually done that yet, or if that was just a pledge to try and do some jawboning and juice the markets and be like, see, we have a market for these bonds. Don't worry. But like I said, that's finding a buyer is only part of the problem. It's going to be a problem going forward as you have to have more and more debt rollover. But even if they do find a buyer, it's going to be at these market interest rates, which cause the yearly interest that we're spending on the national debt to go up, regardless of. So it'll prevent a failed bond market, I guess, but to where you actually can't cover what is owed, but it just means we owe even more. So it's not a real solution at all. In fact, it makes the problem even bigger. And like I said, we're not even getting anything out of that. So this additional hundreds of billions of dollars that we're going to be spending on interest versus what we spent the last few years, we don't even get anything out of that. We get nothing additional out of that as a country. No additional infrastructure, no additional resources, no additional United States citizens getting money, I guess, except unless you are holders of that bonds, you're just getting money that's being rapidly depreciated. But in general, like we're not buying anything with this. We're just it's a debt burden cost, and it's getting worse and worse. And even the mainstream sources have said that somewhere around like 2050, it would reach a impossible critical mass, and it's not going to take that long because of all the other stuff that's going on in the world. But that's even like the official normie sources saying that like it's over at like I think they said 2050 in terms of the debt interest subsuming the entire national budget because it's going to keep going like this. And even if the rates are low, that just makes it take a little longer. If you don't actually reduce the amount of debt, any interest rate makes it exponentially grow. It could be a 0.5% interest rate, and your debt is growing by 0.5% every year unless you actually pay it down, which is not possible for the U.S. to do given the amount of money that we're actually taking in, the nature of the dollar, that every dollar is created by borrowing it into existence with a debt attached to it. So there is always more debt than there is even money to pay it off. Chops says need that Castronoff and Fitz audit to get 21 trillion back. Yeah, I haven't looked into that. Those numbers are so insane that I haven't researched that. And she, of course, thinks that they were using it to like build underground bases and stuff like that, which is certainly possible. We've all heard rumors about the like under the Denver airport, big bunker and everything. So I guess that's where I would head to if we had a real like the movies like 2012 or something like that, or Greenland or the giant comet. I guess I would just try to go to the Denver airport and fight my way into whatever bunker's there. Lucius says, don't worry about feds if you are not low IQ or engaging in very illegal activity. As for your Q question, local churches may be a good start on part of local civic societies. Yeah, you just have to be careful about who you give important information to until you make sure that they're on the same page as you. Chris says, eventually someone in the group is going to ask, what's everyone thinking? Who's the king leader? That's where it all begins. Yeah, I mean, like I said, things have to be done. It's not easy, but it's not something that can't be done. People naturally fall into groups, naturally fall into hierarchies. You have to identify the people who are going to be like annoying gammas and cause problems and try to usurp authority. There's plenty of people that are not going to cause issues, but you have to be rigorously willing and able to cut out any sort of like of that bad actors because they will show up like the mooches and other bad actors. I'm just planning on becoming Negan and see what happens. Yeah, the strong man is one way to do it, but you will always have people coming after you. You got to be able to maintain that position with continued violence, which, as history's shown, certainly can be done. You know, that's like the Genghis Khan types. But that if live by the sword, die by the sword. But it is a model that actually works. But like I said, people naturally, humans anyways, naturally form different types of hierarchies, social structures, communities. People are not lone beings. They don't want to be off by themselves. Just like I was talking, that's why the problem I was talking about earlier of people kind of modulating or changing their conclusions, at least their outward conclusions, based on what everyone else thinks about them saying this. That why that's a problem is because people do have these tendencies, and that actually helps make um, people fall into groups more naturally, but it also allows them to give power to people who shouldn't have it, to not do things because they're afraid of being outgrouped and things like that. So Raving Lunatic says, what trouble's on the horizon? As I mentioned earlier, it's economic. It's mostly related to the weakening dollar. $9 trillion in debt rollover at bond levels that seem hard to suppress at the moment. 4.5%, or roughly somewhere around there for 10-year yields, and could go much higher. And we have to reborrow 10 trillion or $9 trillion at that amount. Debt ceiling is going to get raised soon. And we have another BRICS conference. And then, of course, all the stuff going on domestically with the court system basically um, going outside the scope of their actual power to try and control the executive branch, basically illegally, or at least extra legally. The judicial branch has no power to do anything with the Article 2 powers of the executive branch. Um, and it's kind of by design that the judicial branch doesn't have a technical enforcement mechanism. The legislative branch has the purse strings, basically. They can control the money to some extent. The executive branch technically has the uh, actual enforcement mechanism of, military, the weapons. And then the judicial is a third, separate equal branch, but it doesn't actually have its own enforcement mechanism. And you have these judges trying to take over the power of, in some cases, both the legislative and executive branch, and trying to control what these other entities are doing legally. Vegas would be more fun in Mad Max than Denver, for sure. I think so. But if I need to be deep underground, they do have some Tesla tunnels here, but I don't think they're quite as good of a place to be as a massive Illuminati bunker in Denver. Dig under that evil horse with the red eyes, find it somewhere. That would be having fun running with those degenerate bulls. I don't know if you're referring to what I was tweeted about the other day, but this is totally unrelated to anything. But I've always thought that, like, as a youngster, that running with the bulls, like in Spain, would be, fun, exciting, dangerous thing to do. Obviously, it's dangerous. And I was like, I'm willing to risk some injury to do something fun. But now that I have all these videos on like Instagram and the Instagram death reels and everything, it seems like anytime someone trips or the bull gets to them, it's like a laser guided right up their ass, right the groin or crotch or butthole area. Their horns just are like laser guided. So it's like horrible asshole trauma. I'm like, no, man, I was willing to get thrown against a wall or something, but not get totally reamed. So I changed my mind. I'm not running with the pools anymore. Got to dig your own hole. Yeah, it's hard to dig out here, man. Lots of rocks. There is this hilarious Instagram. I think I mentioned this in one live stream before of some woman who's like obviously has some sort of some kind of tism, but she just decided to start digging a big like a tunnel under her house, and not for any particular reason, as far as I know. They said it's just a form of the tism, but she's making like an actual mine shaft kind of bunker thing under her house. Pretty hilarious. Says an arm I can deal with, but not a crotch. But yeah, I don't need like genitals torn off or 9 inches of horn up my rear. I was willing to get like thrown against a wall, maybe a hoof in the fucking thorax, but nah, I'm done. For that reason, I'm out. Find something else to do. I just jumped off a cliff, do some more skydiving, stuff like that. Yeah, I have zero desire to get gored by a 2,500 pound animal, especially in that particular location. Yeah. Sometimes they're heavier than that. I know some of those bulls can be like 4,000. No, that's a little bit heavier. That's like a rhino. But yeah, 2,000 pounds for sure. Huge either way. Much heavier than me. My 165 pounds get airborne for sure. Sue says, I would totally do that if I wasn't living on stone. Yeah, exactly. Like it's interestingly enough though, it's probably better and maybe even easier to do it if you're like legit stone and just chip it out with a jackhammer than if you lived on like back in Florida, sand and water. Here, I would probably much rather do it here than try to deal with constantly being underwater. I think the best bet if you're in a lot of those places, if you have the land, is just to make an above ground bunker and then just bury it, make it like a mountain. More like when they would have these ammo uh and munitions kind of bunkers that you see on some military bases that would just have like a concrete kind of dome that they would just cover with a lot of and they'd be like aircraft hangars and stuff too, a lot of earth. You could get the same amount of shielding that way, not have to worry about water, not have to worry about digging. You could build the thing first and then cover it with earth. That's what I would do if I had a bunch of locations. Just make a yeah, mound. You could still cover the entrance, make it you have to go somewhere hidden to get to it. Just make it look like a hill. Maybe you still go under the house a little bit, but you would have to do a lot less digging. It'd probably be a lot easier to build. No liquid issues, stuff like that. Extra four high says Canadian Prepper had an interview with Ron from Atlas Shelters. Ron confirmed the huge bunker to the Denver airport is very much real. He helped work on it. Yeah, I'm aware he said that. So I have no official reason to doubt him, but I will say a lot of people say a lot of things. So you just never know for sure. But if the true end of the world scenario is coming, it'd be worth a shot to go there versus somewhere else. Gotta wear steel-plated Kevlar diaper. Sue says, my father 40 years ago dug a 6-foot drainage hole in his land. Took him 3 months a week of digging. Hell no, you can't dig his. Yeah, you have to use power tools for sure, jackhammers, maybe blasting and stuff like that. So, but if you're somewhere like that, if you have space, you could build an above ground thing and just cover it with soil, pack it down. Bunker notes are being taken. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was definitely, if I get a plot of land, I'll probably go that route unless it's somewhere that's fairly easy to dig out because I don't see, obviously it would be less hidden, but if you could actually disguise it as and not a huge one, if you're just talking about like an actual bunker that would be, especially if you wouldn't need to make it more than a couple hundred square feet, then I think you could make a structure like that, concrete and everything that you could cover pretty easily, still make pretty disguised plants growing on top of it and everything else. Bamf says, greetings from the frozen wasteland. Greetings, sir. Lucius says, I have a good source that the super bunkers are real with enormous quantities of supplies only for key members of government. Certainly that would be the case. So you would have to fight your way over there and then maybe say like, try to fight your way in, dig up my old military uniform and see if I can still pretend to get my way in. So but yeah, it would be tough because it would be certainly extremely well protected, extremely well controlled. But like I said, if it's a extinction level comet or something like that, what else you got to lose? Might as well try. Might as well, be worth fighting your way in there versus just, oh, my cactus is getting low. I need to. The good thing is these are rechargeable batteries, so I will plug these in, and next week you will see them. I'll put a link in the description to those. I mentioned it before. These have been working pretty well. This is the Power Owl. There's all sorts of different brands, so you can just look at any of them. But the one I got, has the rechargeable AAAs and AA's, and they just both interchangeably fit there, so you don't have to worry about it. And really easy to just pop in. Pairs well with any sort of the solar chargers or any sort of power generation that you have. A lot of different small things can be run off double and AAA batteries. Even things you don't necessarily have now, you may forage for later or whatever. A lot of modern things have built-in batteries, but there's still plenty of items that don't. Lights like that, small appliances, whatnot. Any good post-apocalyptic or shit fan movies out in the last few years? Haven't been keeping up with it. Like I said, Greenland has been a few years old now, but that's my favorite one semi-recently. I have not yet watched that Homestead movie that just came out. I plan to watch that and make a review of it. Haven't heard too much about it, so it probably can't be too awesome. But I will watch that and do one of the review videos. This Is How It Ends or whatever it was called with Julia Roberts was not good. Um, just as a movie, it wasn't very good. But still, I have a review video of that if you're going to go watch it. So the last like legitimate ones that I like really liked in the past 10 years would probably be like Greenland and Survival, the Japanese one, Survival Family. Check both of those out if you haven't seen them. I really like those. And 28 Years Later is coming out next month. Yeah, but that's one, it could be a good movie still, but for me, the sweet spot, things I like about apocalypse movies is in the initial stages of the apocalypse and how people react to it. Stuff that takes place years or even months or certainly years later can still be interesting, but I find that less compelling than when this event is happening. I like San Andreas too. The bonus it has Alexander Daddario in it. That's more of a disaster movie than a shit the fan movie, but still could apply. Same elements are there. Pretty good. So those are probably my three favorites in the last several years. Chop says rough guesstimate on where and why all the gold is being hoarded. Ah, man, who knows? It's certainly there's a couple theories. I think the three best theories that I've heard, the most compelling to me. First one being that, um, as someone said, I forget which interview it was lately. They're talking about how it's a result of what when war is happening all around the world, these various currencies and debt obligations and everything don't hold as much weight. And gold is what you need if you really want to make sure you can buy things in a really chaotic wartime scenario. So certainly just hoarding real assets for war is one possible reason. Obviously, all the central banks seeing the writing on the wall. If I know what's going on, it's easy to think of all these people as just being retarded, but they're not all retarded. They know that the writing is on the wall for the currency and everything too. So certainly, even if they don't know exactly what they're going to do as far as backing or a new currency or bricks or whatever, knowing that gold will survive it means it's a lot more valuable to them. So just simply central bank and governments hoarding gold for knowing that the global financial paradigm is going to be changing soon. Specifically, the U.S. doing it for kind of the same reason versus shoring up the Fort Knox if there's going to be audits or us come out and having to switch to some sort of new currency or not even switch, but do some sort of revaluation to make our balance sheet more solvent and all this other stuff. So those are kind of the three real reasons. It's kind of like 2A and 2B, but I can't say for sure. Lucius says totally agree. The it's happening scenarios are best. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Earth Abides was man. I don't even know if I've heard of that one. Do you still think we will see the Fed audited? Probably not like directly audited. I think we're going to see the whole system changing, and the Fed may not really kind of like exist in the form that it does now. I mean, I don't think we'll just go through and see an actual audit because auditing the Fed is the same functionally as ditching the Fed. If you do an honest audit, it would either be a complete lie just to cover and say, everything looks good here. If you honestly audit the Fed and go through exactly what they're doing and how, and everyone in the country actually sees how the sausage is made. There's quotes that people said, if one in even 20 people truly understood the monetary system, there'd be a revolution overnight. And that's sort of how I feel about auditing the Fed moment, because it doesn't even need to do anything like illegal or nefarious by their own standards, just what they're actually do, what they say they do, what we know they do, the way the whole system operates is absurd enough. Mind is literally repelled, like the man says. A process by which money is created is so simple, the mind is repelled. It's a completely fatally flawed system from the moment it was created. It was destined to fail. So I don't think auditing the Fed is really going to be very meaningful. But if they did do it, it would be the end of the Fed because you can't fix these issues. It's the way the system is designed. So I think it's much more likely that the government still has the authority to coin money. So whenever this all comes to a head and we move to some sort of new financial system, some new currency system, they'll just kind of step away from the standard Federal Reserve model. Maybe they'll still exist as like a, committee for helping with monetary policy as advisors or whatever, but they won't necessarily be setting interest rates or whatever. Will probably be more controlled directly by the Treasury. And, they might even use the Fed as a scapegoat if they want people to be able to trust the government in whatever new venture they come out, especially if they're going to try to do something that's not commodity backed, which I think is what they'll do. But regardless, even if they do, if they want to do something like CBDC or even a digital version of commodity backed currency, they might come out and be like, wow, the Fed, these private banks, look at what they've been doing. They fucked it all up. But now it's back under control. The government has it. Don't you worry. And they might, use them as a scapegoat that way when they don't need them anymore anyway. But that's kind of the only real path I see to auditing the Fed is if they want is either lying about it or using it as a way to ditch them. The TV show The Strain is an amazing post-apocalypse show. It's a vampire thing, but it's a very good show. What could happen if everything goes to crap and the internet goes out? Cool, I'll have to check it out because I like those initial, even if the premise, I don't really care if it's vampires or zombies or I prefer realistic ones like EMP or something, but it's that initial like everything's going to shit portion of the SHTF that I really like. And there's actually one, I think I've mentioned this before. I think it was called Black Summer. It was a zombie one. It set up like vignettes or kind of like an anthology type thing almost, where it would just be zoom in on like small instances of various people or groups dealing with the initial onset of the zombie apocalypse, which was like the perfect format. I love the format, exactly what I want to see from like a SHTF kind of media show, movies, whatever. But the characters and the way they like went about dealing with it and problem solving was so atrocious and annoying that I just like couldn't watch it. I was like, what the fuck? To the point of like basically being unrealistic and stuff like that. I just couldn't deal with the characters. I love the format. Some of it was great because they weren't all retarded, but it was just really, really annoying. Not necessarily even unrealistic. Most people are stupid and annoying. So most of the scenarios, as you would see, would end up that way. But it made it really like just ultimately unsatisfying, and I couldn't continue to watch it. Black Summer, the George Floyd riots. Yeah, I mean there is rumors that they're going to try to pardon what's his name, the officer from George Floyd, Chauvin, Derek Chauvin, and of course this is what I've hated recently. Everyone talking about like due process when it comes to the illegal immigrants and habeas corpus and everything, and like they're so full of shit. The people who like it's so obvious that they don't give a fuck about due process. They get mad about their partisan issues. There's been so many just blatant abuses of due process from the government for years. They didn't say anything about it except when it comes to their pet issue, and all of a sudden now they're champions of fucking due process in a way that doesn't even make sense anyway. I love that in the early seasons of Walking Dead, where they had prepper elements, water. Yeah, that the first few seasons of Walking Dead are excellent. I just kind of assume that everyone's seen The Walking Dead, but definitely recommend The Walking Dead for like at least the first 3 to 4 seasons. Don't remember when it started getting kind of a little too extra, but up to where they're in the prison at least. I think that's season 4. Um, really good, really. I'll have to go back and watch it. Now they've just gone so I haven't even seen. They've got like 12 seasons of the first one, 3 or 4 spin-offs that are still running. Pretty ridiculous. And maybe not even bad as far as shows go, but like I said, they moved past. They're just into fantasy type show more so than preparedness. Yeah, as Chauvin is doing federal time and state time. Federal pardon is almost irrelevant other than adding pressure to the state. Trump would need to push enormous pressure on the government, Minnesota government. Yeah, exactly, which is probably unlikely because they would be basically being like, sure, come burn down my state. But who knows what kind of leverage and stuff they have over them, but it's possible. But yeah, they would need a state governor's pardon as well, which is probably unlikely. But I don't know what else they could do about it. Chris says, yeah, seasons 1 to 4 had real survival skills, even had building fires, right? And the stuff in the mall and like raising the crops and dealing with like figuring out exactly what's going on. All that stuff's really cool. Sue says the Daryl spinoff is really good. I normally don't watch spinoffs, but I think it's actually better than most of the actual series. Yeah, like I said, it's not necessarily mean that the shows are bad or it might be awesome even. They're just not really that like it's so far after the event. You're so far into like the lore and everything of the scenario and the world building that it's just no longer really to me counts as like a shit the fan show. Could still be great. Designed to lessen confidence in our current form of government for the new replacement. Yeah, right. Could be. Yeah, I don't see Tim Walz doing Trump's bidding anytime soon. Yeah. But who knows what kind of pressure? They would have to have a reason to try and exert that sort of pressure on them. And obviously, it doesn't seem like they're focused on that right now, but who knows? Lucius says, I'm kind of jelly that fatties and a shit the fan will have a year of food on them, and I have like 2 weeks. Yeah, the Angus Burberry effect. But as someone someone who has a year of food on them, I've talked about this before, but there's a guy in the late 60s, early 70s named Angus Burke, because it's when you see people come out like, you can't just stop eating. That you have to check with your doctor first. You need to eat every 3 hours or you're gonna die. Or like this, if I tell people this, to either save money or do various things, is not eat for a day or two, a week or whatever, something like that. Not fun. I've done it. I did a 72-hour fast on here before because I was like, what's the longest I've ever gone on? I don't even know if I've gone a full 24 hours. So I just did 72. What to know what it felt like, etc. It's supposed to be some health benefits with the purging of different types of autophagy and everything, cell repair that happens. But yeah, so this guy in the 70s, he was or late 60s, was hundreds of pounds overweight. He's just like, fuck it, I'm just stop eating. He didn't eat for like 380 days because he had that much fat on him. That's why your body stores fat. It's just like a hibernating bear. It uses that fat for fuel. All he had was like coffee, water, occasional vitamins, and he lost an average of 12 ounces a day, which makes sense because an ounce of fat a pound of fat, 16 ounces, has about 3,500 calories in it. So that's more than most people need for the day. So if you're doing 25 to 3,000 calories, 3/4 of that seems just about right. So you can figure out, you could go get your body fat tested with a DEXA scan. Don't use the scales, they don't work. You need to get like a DEXA scan to really figure out exactly what your body fat percentage is. And anything above, I would say like 8%, 10%. Below that, you're gonna have, if you start cutting into that, it's not really like extra weight. Certainly anything below like 5%, you're talking starvation mode for sure. But I would go anything above 10%, let's say, and figure out how long you could go without food before you start having some real debilitating kind of effects from it at 12 ounces a day. Figure out the percentage, body fat percentage, multiply that by your weight to get the actual pounds of fat, and subtract that 5 to 10% that you actually need. And that's how long you'll last, roughly, given your basic metabolic rate. Some people will use more than, if you're a smaller woman or a smaller dude, or you're staying inactive, you're not even going to need to burn through 12 ounces a day. If you're giant or super active, it might be more than a pound a day average. Just depends on how many calories you're burning. But you can estimate it at around 2,000, 2,500, or I like the 12 ounces a day because that's a real world example of this guy going about his normal life, living. That's how much it used. So if you have 20 extra pounds of weight, and I mean like extra pounds, so you would be at, let's say, 10%, 12% body fat without that 20 pounds, then that's quite a bit of time, more than a month for sure, that you could go before you're really starting to be hurting. But it depends on your actual, like the fat that you have in your body. You still need water. Um, you probably still want to try to get some salts and stuff if you could. But I mean, ketones, he says you need to monitor ketones in the urine. Ketones will always be present in your urine when you're on any sort of no carb, regardless of whether it's a starvation diet or not, of just like the fat in your body. If you just don't eat carbs for usually somewhere around 24 hours, you'll start having ketones showing up in your urine. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just going to happen when your body shifts into fat burning mode, into ketosis, as it were. If you have a 2,700 calories per day sitting rate, that's pretty high, but that's still doable. Be careful with doing that if you're hiking. I was fasting while hiking and almost passed out in the backcountry. I imagine this was pretty early on in your fast. If you but yeah, you always got to be careful just jumping into anything, and doing it while expending energy is going to take your body getting used to. But I imagine that was just your body really not wanting to shift from the cheap energy of like glycogen and carbs into burning fat. And if you had been several days into a fast, you probably wouldn't have passed out. And it could have been unrelated. You might have just been slightly dehydrated, something like that. But yeah, obviously you want to be careful. And it's certainly not fun. When I did that fast, I really had, it's the painful part is when your body is switching from like using carbs and sugar for energy, and because it really wants to use that. It's easier, it's cheaper. Um, So that was when I would really get like at the 24-hour mark. It's like the hunger pang, like the actual like stabbing pangs and a lot of like bloating. But once that passed, I was very hungry, obviously, the next 2 days, but it was a lot less uncomfortable for the day 2 and 3 than it was for the day 1, for sure. It was the first day and it was really hot. I had no idea what I was doing. Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for being very uncomfortable. But you probably wouldn't have died, hopefully. What's the political climate like in Vegas these days? Vegas is overall blue, but mostly purple. Like it officially goes blue always. Overall, Nevada is very red outside of Reno and Vegas, but no one lives outside of Reno and Vegas. Our homies like High Desert Pioneer aside, the vast majority of the population of the state are in Reno and Vegas. And there's like any other large-ish cities, they tend to be blue, but they're not like deep, deep blue. And it's very interesting because it's very fractured. There is no like one coherent ideology or group of Vegas. It's kind of like a very free-ish. So it's not definitely not the type of city that you would get jumped wearing a MAGA hat. I've seen people at the casinos with them and stuff like that. There's a lot of different groups. You have a lot of Chinese people here. You have a lot of Mexican people here. And so just like these various groups that all tend to lean blue and then the big city ideas, but it's not like it's not like going to Portland or New York City or Chicago. There's plenty of people that are pretty right wing. You can open carry, you can conceal carry. It has a pretty free, like easygoing kind of vibe of just like allowing things in general. So it's really not too definitely not I wouldn't be able to tolerate it if it was like California or Portland or something like that. So well, it's officially goes blue. The state is like close to going red overall. Bam said I did starve myself 20 minus 23 kilograms in 1 year a year ago. Wow, that's a nice weight loss. Damn. Ahmed, hello, says I had a ruptured eardrum and apparently they grow back usually. Mine did thankfully. Wow, yeah, they can for sure. They don't always, but they definitely can. Hey Drew, what's up? Says Vegas seems like nobody gives a shit. Yeah, yeah. So I was just saying nobody gives a shit to stay out of people's face. It's definitely kind of the vibe that and I've said before that my assessment of Vegas is there's really nothing you can do here to be the weirdest person in the room, which is great for me because I've always been a little weird, but it does make me forget how weird I am if I go somewhere else and I'm used to not even having to worry about it. Because there's always somebody doing something weird or looking weird or and you're just like, yeah, so yeah, it definitely has that like whatever kind of climate, but it does trend in terms of voting and stuff slightly blue. Jason says it would have been interesting to monitor sugar throughout that type of diet. The spikes must have been something. Yeah, they can be, but not an after initially. You know what I mean? If you're talking about the starvation diet. Your almond says true story. Just use ear drops. It can be used for the eyes too. Well, I'm glad it healed up. Vegas must protect that Area 51 base. Yeah. Feel free says I got jumped in Vegas on this trip by a whole group of gangster kids. Tried to steal my chain and beat me up in front of everyone. Well, that sucks. While wearing a suit. Damn. Hope you put up a good fight. Thankfully, someone in the crew told the Alpha douche to fall back. Good. Hopefully, you got some good licks in. Like I said, you are allowed to conceal carry here. It's still not permitless. Bunch of jerks, which is stupid because they have permitless open carry, but you have to have a permit to conceal carry. Dumb. True. There's always someone more exactly. Like there's just nothing you can do to be the weirdest person in the room. So you kind of have to get used to being like, whatever. 380 ACP enough for shit the fan. I mean, if you want my short answer, I don't think so. But I mean, it's certainly enough to kill people. It's not bad. It's certainly usable as a defensive round. I just don't see any reason to go with it. Like, what reason are you talking about going with 380, especially in a shit the fan scenario? Like, if you're talking like every day, I do recommend people have like for me, the LCP or Ruger LCP Max, fantastic little gun, so small, and the 380 ACP is still suitable for self-defense. It definitely can get the job done. You get 12 rounds with the extended mag in that thing. So, and it can just disappear in almost any outfit. So it's useful to have. But in most scenarios, it's not that much bigger to carry a 9mm. I carry the Glock 43X MOS. I can wear that, and I have a specific outfit that I wear. I'm going to make a video on that soon because I've been basically carrying every single day for a few years now. And So I just don't. So like, would I rather have a 380 ACP than nothing? Of course, and definitely can defend yourself with it. But for specifically shit the fan, it's going to be very underpowered because the scenarios that you're likely to encounter are probably going to be more extreme, more likely to be multiple people, more likely to be people who are also armed or whatever. So I just don't see any reason to rely on 380 ACP for SHTF. If you're talking about just worrying around town, I mean, like I said, I have never had a situation in my entire life where I carrying or not, where I would have had to or needed to shoot yet, thankfully. There's been a couple scenarios where obviously I'm glad I have it on me just in case, but that's 40 plus years of not needing a gun, not needing to fire a gun. So even just having the 380 ACP on you as an emergency backup is fine. I don't like the thought process of if you don't have two guns and two extra magazines and this, and you're not going to survive, because in the vast majority of defensive situations, you don't even have to fire your gun. Just having a gun is enough to help you out. So then, but I just think if it makes a difference, if it's going to be, it's really difficult to carry, but I can carry this, then carry the 380. But for question SHTF specifically, no, I don't think it's enough. I don't see any reason to go with it for SHTF because you're not going to have to be as concerned about concealed, about walls, things like that, depending on the scenario. Bam says, I did get used to being hungry after 3 months. Yeah, that's rough. Not highly patriotic in Vegas, but not deep blue either. Not a lot of Trump talk, good or bad. Yeah, like I was saying, it's very just like there isn't not one coherent kind of, there's a little bunch of different groups. So it makes it more of just kind of anything is kind of ignored. Real freezes, I'm Canadian, so I was going with knuckles only. Yeah, that and charisma points. Yeah, try to look scary, I guess. You know, I'd even consider 22 long rifle SHF with a rifle because you can carry thousands of rounds forever, long after the 9mm 223 has run out in 3 years, you'd still have ammo. Yeah, potentially, but like what kind of scenario you're talking about where you'd have to be worried about thousands of, like I have a lot of 5.56 and 9mm. How much shooting am I going to be doing? Did you really think we're going to be in a scenario where like you need 20 to 30,000 rounds and not like 5 to 10,000 rounds isn't going to be enough? That's a lot of firefights. That's a lot of shooting. Um, that's a crazy scenario. But yes, I definitely have additional ammo stored because you can store a lot more of it. You can carry a lot more of it. But if you're in a scenario where you're shooting that much, I really don't want to be relying on a 22 long rifle. You know, they are very underpowered for any offensive scenario. The failure rate for rimfire ammunition is a lot higher, but they're still a gun. You can still kill people with it, still hunt with it. For bugging out, like I said, it depends on, again, bugging out is such a unique thing because it's going to be so dependent on what's actually going on. And I've said this before in a video, like whenever a scenario comes up to where you do have to do whatever your version of bugging out is, you're going to look like either a genius or a retard, depending on what you have prepared for it, because it's gonna be so specific to that scenario. And I think in most scenarios, you will initially, probably 90%, you would initially be leaving in a vehicle. And so you would have a bunch of gear with you. And even still, like how much ammo are you really talking about carrying? If you're talking about like literally carrying it, even in 22, 550 rounds, 1,000 rounds, that's a lot, but it's still pretty heavy. And I think I would rather have, if I didn't know what I was going to face, I think I would in almost every scenario rather have 200 or 300 rounds of 5.56 than 1,000 rounds of 22 long rifle. But it just depends on what the scenario is looking like. Yeah, having a plasma rifle in the 40-watt range would be ideal, but just what you see here, pal. This phase plasma rifle, yeah. Phase plasma rifle, 40-watt range. Just what you see here, pal. Any of those were ideal for home defense, honestly. 45 long slide with laser sighting. The Uzi 9mm, 12 gauge autoloader, all ideal for home defense. Make sure to test your gear. I just got back from Yosemite with untested backpack. It sucks so bad I had to buy a new one or I couldn't hike to the back. Yeah, exactly. And it's great to test it. I mean, that's how you test it. But you probably want to at least walk around your neighborhood or something, because I can't tell you how many times I'm doing ruck march and stuff, little things about like where something would rub, the noise it would make, or the imbalanced weight, or digging in, or the strap fit, something like that. Just and not even necessarily the gear that you have, because you might find something to say this isn't going to work, but just how you configure it. for weight distribution, for noise, for ease of access. You might find yourself being like, man, I don't need this thing at all. And I'm constantly digging in to get this other thing. Let me put that in this pocket near the front, that sort of stuff. Ruger SP-101. That's a cool revolver. 357 Magnum is my EDC. That's the 8-shot, right? Doesn't it have the 8-shot revolver? 2-speed load. Interesting to use a wheel gun for a EDC. It's a fairly large one too, but it is a badass gun. I've wanted one of those. I think speaking of The Walking Dead, I think she has with that the girl that who was Glenn's baby mama. What's her name in the show? She was rocking the SP-101 for a while, I think. Maggie, is that her name? SP-101. Images. To Walking Dead. I think she had it for a while. Somebody did. Am I crazy? Did she have one? I can't look at all these pictures. But it's a cool revolver for sure. Oh, okay. I'm not the SP-101. So what's that 8-shot? It's a Smith and Wesson M&P, right? That's the one I'm thinking of. The M&P revolver with 8-shot. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Sorry, I got it confused with the Ruger. She had the Smith and Wesson M&P with 8 rounds. That's a pretty cool revolver, but it is fairly big. Yeah, the SP-101 is the much smaller one, which is much easier to carry. That's what I was thinking of. But Maggie, yeah, she's with Negan now. Warbred Wives are a thing. Yeah, seriously. I just know Taurus 357 for hiking. Yeah, a lot of those are really easy to carry just because the size, the air weights and stuff like that. The Smith & Wesson air weights. I used to fix those as a medic. Fix what? People's packs. Oh, get a foot patch. So CLM says get a foot patch for your prep. Yeah, dude, that is the one thing you definitely want if in a bug out bag, especially if you're not having to ruck or march and hike all the time. No matter what shoes you're wearing, if you're not doing like multiple miles a day in them, you will get hot spots and blisters and not even on your feet if you're wearing a pack a few days in a row. So you definitely want to have a bunch of moleskin, some athletic tape, um, ways to deal with blisters and hot spots, and like some different types of like salve or ointment that you can just stuff it's rubbing. Even because if you're not even used to like walking a bunch, I remember I had a fucking wad of cash in my pocket from poker, and I walked down the strip to see it was a dress shirt, like a button-up style shirt, not a dress shirt, a casual shirt, but it was a button-up shirt with a pocket, and I had it buttoned in there. And just from walking the 2 or 3 miles down to see them demo the trop, that wad of cash like fucking chafed the hell out of my nipple. I was like, the next day I was like, what the fuck? And I didn't even notice it at the time. So you start doing that stuff, like you don't even know what's rubbing and what's not until you start putting in big miles. And then if you're not ready to deal with that, you would just be in agony. And I know this from being in agony on some of these of rock marches. Rating of Grit Colt's Python. Good for shit the fan. Awesome. But I personally think that modern semi-automatic pistols are so reliable and stuff now that at least for if you're talking about the first few years of a shit fan scenario, that the reloading speed, the capacity, everything like that is so much better with a semi-automatic that I would never go for a wheel gun just because of that. Having a few around for if things really start to wear down and you need something that can just with super doesn't have to worry about as many springs and everything else, but they can still break. Get your fishing kits and hit the like button, folks. I appreciate that, Mark Olson. Yeah, that does help with the like button. And go ahead and check out. And better buy some because I haven't bought a resupply because unfortunately I do have to buy some of the components from China because this is the only place to get them at any. Seriously, like the lead stuff that they literally don't make them in the U.S. anymore. the lead weights and things like that. So I haven't been buying because of like the price increases and tariffs, and who knows what the prices will be if I go to restock. What if I'll have to vastly increase the price to make it tenable? So if you were thinking about getting a Rule the Wasteland fishing kit anytime soon, get it now. And they're on Amazon. Yes, extra socks and sock liners are a big one if you like a thin pair of like nylon socks or sock liners help if you're really having trouble with. I wouldn't long term. I think it's better to help your feet build up and not have as much movement inside. But if it's especially if it's right off the bat or a new pair of boots, having that extra layer to absorb the friction in there can really help. Basically, two pairs. And yeah, or if your feet get wet, for sure. Do you still like Zero shoes? Love them. Wear them all the time in multiple pairs. Definitely need to practice with those because if you're used to really supportive footwear, arch support and stuff. No, it's not actually not good if you don't already have a foot problem. It's kind of like wearing a back brace or a cast or something that can actually weaken the structures of your foot to have too much support purely for comfort. So, but if your foot's used to that those muscles and tendons and everything can have weakened, and it can be painful to go right into like a barefoot model. So get some, start wearing them for extending the distances and stuff like that. But I wear those a lot. I love Zero shoes. Yeah, I upped my walking to 30K steps a couple weeks. That's awesome. That's a lot. Welcome to World of Plantar Fasciitis and getting all this stuff. Yeah, and like I said, some of that is related to stuff like that. It's the amount of stretching and stuff that happens to those ligaments that you're not used to. Hopefully, they'll strengthen up and you'll move past it. And sometimes it can just be related to stiffness and inflammation and stuff if you haven't done it your whole life. But I would try to keep doing as much as your body can tolerate, and hopefully you should be able to get through it. Deer shoes are awesome. My everyday shoes for hiking, backpacking. I wear the Vivo hiking boots. They're amazing, and Zero hot spots are rubbing the best. It's so lightweight, Zero shoes. Just look, it's like if you put a real pair of boots, because I have a pair of Red Wings too, which I absolutely love. They'll last probably forever. They look sweet, but they're not uncomfortable, but they're much more protective than something like a Zero shoe, but they're so fucking heavy. Especially if you've been used to wearing minimalist shoes and you put those bad boys, they're like 2 pounds each from shoe that's like 6 ounces each, maybe to like 2 pounds. You're like, what? That feels like you've got lead bricks on your feet. You're like, what the hell is this? Lucia says, I do sprints from time to time, usually no pain. Did them in full gear, was aching the next. Yeah, if you did just that extra loading and everything that you're not used to. Yeah, Red Wings they're solid for sure. Not cheap though. What happened to the Prepper Trifecta? Nothing official. I gotta call those guys and get them back on. Get on with JJ. I saw what's his name. Che did a video not too long ago. He threw up some random commentary video, so he's still out there. I need to get him and either JJ or one of the other guys on there too. But I think I'm gonna call. I gotta eat, but I appreciate you guys tuning in. And like I said, remember to sign up for Patreon if you want a chance to win this sweet knife and a couple other small prizes. It's not a cheap one, this Fox Edge. And yeah, David the Good. Definitely got to contact him. He's the man. I'll get him on for sure. I just keep forgetting. I had some specific questions I was going to ask him about to his specialty, which is growing food, composting, and all that great stuff. So appreciate it, Chris. Thanks for the words. If you could hit the like button, guys. And like I said, buy the Rule Boys and Fishing Kit and stay safe.